My downstairs neighbor knocked on my door on a Tuesday morning. I'd spoken to her maybe 4 times in 2 years. Pleasantries in the hallway, the occasional nod at the mailboxes. She was private the way people in cities are private, present but contained, polite but not familiar. So when I opened the door and saw her standing there with an expression I couldn't immediately read, my first thought was that something was wrong with the building. She asked how many people had been staying in my apartment the previous week. I told her one, a single guest, booked through the platform, a 3-night stay while I was out of town for work. She nodded slowly. She said she'd heard at least 2 people moving around upstairs every night that week. Not loud, just the normal sounds of habitation, footsteps, the occasional movement of furniture, water running, the sounds of people living in the space. I said it was probably just the one guest, sound carrying, maybe she'd misjudged. She looked at me for a moment before she said the next part. She said the only night she hadn't heard anything from my apartment, not a single sound, complete silence, was the Wednesday, the middle night of the 3-night booking. I thought about that for a second. Wednesday was the night I'd come back early. A meeting had been canceled. I'd driven back and slept in my own bed. The guest had been there. I had been there. 2 people in the apartment, and the neighbor had heard nothing. I stood in my doorway and felt something shift in my understanding of the previous week. Quietly, the way the ground shifts before you feel it. I'd been listing the apartment for about 8 months by then. It wasn't something I'd planned carefully. A friend suggested it after I mentioned I was traveling more for work, long stretches away, the apartment sitting empty, the mortgage not carrying either way. The math was straightforward. I listed it, set up a lockbox, wrote a description that was honest without being detailed, and let the platform handle the rest. The first few bookings were uncomplicated. Couples mostly, a solo traveler once, a woman visiting family in the city for a long weekend. I'd come home to find things exactly as I'd left them, or close enough. The occasional displaced cushion, a mug in the wrong cabinet, the small evidence of another person's temporary inhabitation. Nothing that bothered me. I had one rule that I hadn't written in the listing but held to private. I always came back the day after checkout and walked the apartment before doing anything else. Not suspicion, just habit. A check, a way of re-establishing that the space was mine again. My apartment is not large. A 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor. The kind of layout that makes sense of itself immediately. You can see almost everything from the entrance hallway. Kitchen to the left, living room straight ahead, bedroom and bathroom to the right. I know it the way you know a space you've lived in for years. The specific weight of each room, which floorboard gives slightly underfoot. How the afternoon light falls across the kitchen counter. This booking was a single guest, male, mid-30s based on his profile, good reviews from previous hosts. A short note saying he was in the city for a conference. Standard. I left the key in the lockbox, drove to my sister's place 3 hours away, and didn't think about the apartment again until the checkout notification came through on my phone. I drove back the following afternoon. The apartment looked normal. More than normal, it looked barely used. The bed had been remade, which guests didn't always bother. The kitchen was clean. Nothing out of place that I could identify immediately. It was only when I sat down on the couch that I noticed the smell. Faint, like something had been cooked that I didn't recognize. Not unpleasant, just foreign. The specific olfactory signature of another person's habits in a space calibrated to yours. I opened a window and didn't think about it further. The neighbor's visit was 3 days after checkout. After she left, I went back inside and sat down and thought carefully about what she'd said. 2 people moving around. 3 nights. Silence only on the Wednesday, the night I'd been there myself. I opened the platform on my phone and checked the booking details. Single guest, 1 adult. The listing was clear on occupancy. The price reflected a single occupant. Additional guests required notification. I checked my security camera. I had installed it 6 months earlier. A small device above the front door pointed at the entrance and the section of hallway visible from it. I had disclosed in the listing prior. It recorded motion-activated clips, stored to the cloud, 30 days of history. I pulled up the footage from the booking dates. The check-in window was Thursday afternoon, 3 to 7 p.m. I scrolled through the motion-activated clips from that window. Delivery notification from the building's front door intercom. A neighbor passing in the hallway. Nothing at my door. I checked further. Thursday evening, Thursday night, Friday morning. Nothing. My front door did not open once between when I left on Thursday morning and when I returned on Sunday afternoon. I watched the Sunday clip of myself entering. Unmistakably me, key in the lockbox. Door opening, stepping inside. Then nothing until I left again briefly on Monday. I scrolled back through the entire 3-day window 3 times. I checked the timestamps. I checked whether the camera had been offline at any point. The app shows connectivity gaps, and there were none. The camera had been active and recording the entire time. My front door had not opened. I sat with that for a long time. Then I started going through the apartment differently than I had on Sunday. Not a surface check, a methodical room-by-room examination. I started in the kitchen. The mugs. I keep 4, hanging on hooks inside the cabinet. All 4 were there, but 2 were on the wrong hooks. Small thing, the kind of thing you rearrange without noticing. But I notice. I've lived with these mugs for 3 years, and they hang in a specific order because I reach for them without looking. The bathroom. My toiletries are arranged on a shelf above the sink in a way that makes sense to me. The order had shifted, nothing missing, nothing added, just a slight rearrangement. The kind that happens when someone picks things up and puts them down somewhere slightly different. The bedroom. I checked the closet. My clothes were undisturbed, but on the shelf above the hanging rail, where I keep 2 spare blankets folded, one of the blankets had been moved. It was still there, still folded, but placed on top of the other one rather than beneath. Someone had taken it down, used it, perhaps, refolded and put it back, but in the wrong order. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the blanket and thought about the camera. No entry through the front door, but someone had been in the apartment. Someone who knew it well enough to put things back. Someone who had used a blanket and refolded carefully, who had used mugs and returned them to almost the right hooks, who had rearranged the bathroom shelf and not quite gotten it back to where it had been. Not a guest doing what guests do carelessly. Someone trying to leave no trace and almost succeeding. I checked the windows, all locked from the inside, as I'd left them. I checked the building's secondary entrance, a fire door at the back of the stairwell, accessible only with a key fob. I asked the building manager whether anyone had reported a lost fob recently. He checked and said no. I reported it to the platform. They were thorough and unhelpful in equal measure. They escalated the booking, reviewed the guest's account, noted that he had not checked and according to their records, meaning his access code for the lockbox had not been used. They suspended his account pending investigation and sent me a form to complete. The guest's account had no activity after my booking. No response to the platform's messages. No other bookings made. The account had been created 4 months earlier, used twice before mine with positive views, and then gone silent. I asked the 2 previous hosts whether anything had seemed unusual. One didn't respond. The other replied within an hour. She said everything had seemed normal at the time, but that afterwards she'd noticed her spare key, the one she kept in a kitchen drawer for emergencies, had been moved. She'd assumed she'd moved it herself and forgotten. She'd listed her apartment 3 more times since then. Nothing unusual had happened, but she'd stopped keeping the spare key in the kitchen. I had the locks changed, new lockbox code, new deadbolt, a secondary chain lock I'd never felt the need for before. I took the apartment off the platform. I went through every drawer and cabinet and shelf and documented the exact position of everything. Photographs on my phone, a record I could check against. I've lived there since without listing again. Nothing unusual has happened. The apartment is exactly as it should be every morning. The mugs are on the right hooks. The blankets are in the right order. No smell I don't recognize. No sounds my neighbor can't account for. But I think about the blanket. Someone took it down and slept under it. Someone who came and went through a door that the camera never saw open. Who moved through the rooms carefully enough to almost leave no trace. Who knew the apartment well enough to know where the spare blanket was kept. Not a stranger who'd stumbled in. Someone familiar with the layout, the contents, the rhythms of the space. The kind of familiarity that takes time. The platform never identified who had created the guest account. The profile photo was generic. The verified ID on file turned out to be fraudulent. The platform informed me of this 6 weeks later in a brief email, apologetic in tone, practical in content. They had referred the matter to the trust and safety team. I received no further updates. I thought about the timeline. The account was created 4 months before my booking. 2 previous stays with positives. Hosts who noticed small things afterward and explained them away. 4 months of access to different apartments. Learning layouts. Learning where things were kept. And then mine. 3 nights. The camera never triggered. No entry on record. On the Wednesday, I came home early and slept in my own bed, and apparently the apartment was silent for the first time all week. I don't know where he was on Wednesday night. I don't know if he knew I was there. I don't know how he got in, or how he left, or whether he was ever actually gone while I slept 8 feet away behind a door I hadn't thought to lock from the inside. I lock it from the inside now. Every night, without exception. It doesn't make me feel as safe as it should.